And finally, let's see how we can consume RESTful services in Xamarin Forms. So for this demo, we're going to use a fake RESTful service called JSON placeholder. So in Google, search for JSON placeholder. Here's the first link. So JSON placeholder. And here you can see various endpoints, like we've got endpoints for posts, comments, albums, and so on. For this demo, I'm going to use this endpoint here, posts. So when we hit this endpoint, we get this JSON result, which is an array of posts. So first, copy this. Now back in Xamarin Studio, we're going to build something very similar to what we built in the last lecture. So again, to make it easier for you to code along, I've attached a zip file where you can get the code I'm using in this lecture. So first, I want to store this URL in our class. So private constant string URL. And we set this to this endpoint. Now, in order to consume a web service, we need to add two packages to our projects. So here's our PCL, add, NuGet packages. The first one is newtonsoft.json, which we use to serialize or deserialize JSON objects. And the second one is microsoft.net.http, which we use to work with RESTful endpoints. So pause the video and add these two packages to every project in the solution. Also, there is a problem with Xamarin at the time of recording this video, so it doesn't like this HTTPS here. The workaround for that is to go in the solution. For iOS, right-click, Options. Under iOS build, change HTTP client implementation to NSURL session. If you don't do this, chances are you may get a runtime exception when you launch the application. If this doesn't work for you, another workaround is to change SSL/TLS implementation to mono. You shouldn't have any problems when launching the application in Android. But in case you get any unexpected exceptions, it's best to look it up in Google. I'm sure someone else has had the same problem. Now, to consume web services, we need to create an instance of HTTP client. So private HTTP client. Now let's resolve the namespace. So this is defined in system.net.http. And we can initialize it straight away here. Now, in onAppearing method, we're going to send an HTTP GET request to this endpoint to get the list of all posts. So, client.get string async. Here we pass the URL. Now we await the result and we get this content. And obviously we need to apply the async modifier here. So we have the content and this is just a string. We need to deserialize it. And for that, we're going to use JSON convert class. Let's resolve the namespace. So this is defined in newtonsoft.json. Now, .deserialize object. And this is a generic method. In the generic parameter, we specify list of posts. Let's bring in the namespace for list. So now we get a list of posts. And of course, we should pass this content as the argument here. Now, similar to the last lecture, we're going to create an observable collection as the item source for our list view. So, private observable collection of posts. And we call it underline posts. Now let's bring in the namespace. All right, so we have all the posts. Now we initialize our observable collection, new observable collection of posts, and pass this posts object here. And finally, posts list view dot items source. We set this to our observable collection. So pretty basic. Let's run the application. So here are the posts we get from the server. Now let's implement the add function. So first we create a new post object just set the title. And again, we can use datetime.now.ticks to differentiate different titles. Now, to create a post on the server, we need to send an HTTP post request. So, client.post async. The first parameter here is the URL. And the second is an HTTP content, which is an abstract class. Here we're going to create one of its derivatives, which is string content. Now here we need to serialize our post object into a string. So, content, again, JSON convert, serialize object. We pass this post object here. We get the content, which is a string, and then simply pass it here. Now we need to await the result and add async here. So at this point, we create this post on the server, and now we need to add this to our list view. So underline posts dot. This time I'm going to use the insert method because here we can pass an index, and this allows us to put this post at the beginning of the list, so we don't have to scroll down to see it. Let's run the application. All right, I'm going to click add. Beautiful. Now note that when I click add, it takes about a second until we see the result. See? One more time. It takes about a second or half a second. The reason you see this delay is because first we tried to create this post on the server. So this line is not executed until we return from the server. But if I move this line further up here, this is what we call optimistic update. So this line will cause the post to appear in our list view immediately, and then we go and save it to the server. Let's see the difference. So add, look, it appears immediately. And by the way, this is a fake service. So if you quit the application and launch it again, you're not going to see these new posts. So it doesn't really persist the data in a database on the server. Now let's implement update and delete. So for the update, I'm going to get the first post in the list, change its title just like before. Now again, we need to serialize it as a string and then call the server. So I'm going to copy these two lines, paste them here, and this time change post async to put async. So this will send an HTTP put request to the server. We also need to change the URL to include the ID of the post. This is the RESTful convention. So we can add that here, plus post.id. And finally, because we're using await here, we need to apply async here. So pretty simple, no magic. And finally, for the delete, once again, we get the first post in the list. Now we don't need to serialize this because this post is not going in the body of our request. We're simply going to make an HTTP delete call to the server. So we call delete async method, pass the URL, and add the ID of the post. And remember to await it and async here. And finally, we need to remove this from our list view. So underline posts.remove post. Again, we can put this before the call to the server, so we see the changes immediately. So let's delete a few items. Beautiful. Now if we click update, nothing happens on the UI. And the reason for that is because we have not implemented iNotify property changed interface. But the actual call to the server succeeds. So that brings us to the end of this section. We've covered a lot about data access. I hope you enjoyed the content and thank you for watching.